Welcome to Competitive CX, the podcast for financial services professionals tackling client experience challenges. If you're passionate about enhancing client experience and driving client satisfaction, you found your new favorite show.
I'm Adam Grainger, and alongside Melanie Aimer and Hamish Taylor, we delve into essential CX strategies and innovations that are shaping the future of client experience in finance.
With our diverse backgrounds in customer experience and financial services, we're going to bring you some real-world insights and thought-provoking discussions to help you navigate the complexities of delivering exceptional client experiences.
Whether you're a decision maker, a marketer, or anyone in a client-facing role in financial services, you'll find valuable takeaways to elevate your organizational CX strategies.
So come on then, subscribe now and join us in transforming client experience and gaining that competitive edge.
Let's dive in. Good morning, afternoon, or evening to wherever you are. Welcome to our podcast series called Competitive CX. Now, in our last episode, we discussed technology. Is it an enabler or disabler for CX? And today we're going to discuss solving the most common client experience complaints that the financial services industry receive. And in the next episode, we talk about where to start with CX. My name is Melanie Aimer, and for the last 20 years, I've been championing the role of client experience across all different parts of financial services, from capital markets, asset management, private banking, and wealth management. And you might have heard me say before, I'm not satisfied in general that the financial services industry is really cracking the challenges of creating great client experiences. Now, to help me in this quest for new approaches, I'll be joined by two very experienced innovators already having a huge impact in the financial services industry. Firstly, Hamish Taylor, welcome.
Thanks, Melanie. Good to see you again. I'm very delighted that you've invited me back. You obviously haven't got fed up with me yet.
Never, Hamish, never. So Hamish is an award winner, former CEO whose world-leading customer-led transformation approach has inspired hundreds of companies across 48 countries to rethink their customer approach. He has also been dubbed the master thief for his track record of transferring ideas from one sector to another. And then we're also joined by Adam Grainger. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you, Melanie. Great to be here, as always, on episode 8.
Episode 8, indeed. So, Adam, you lead a company called Accomplish, who's pioneered the measurement of understanding the key drivers of great client experiences and enabling the asset management industry to really pinpoint where their CX either out or underperforms. And we're going to be asking you to bring that thinking into the wider financial services community. So together, we're going to tackle the challenges of client experience in financial services. Now, for those who are listening, we welcome your thoughts and views. And to do this, you can either reach out to us directly or leave us a comment. But if you are listening, we'd like to ask you a favor, and that is to rate and review the episode so that others can hear the episode as well, and we can get the news out there. And we really do hope you'll enjoy the podcast series. So today we're going to be covering the topic, solving the most common client experience complaints. Now, Hamish, I thought we'd start off with you because it'd be great to hear your thoughts about how you do complaint handling more generally before we get into the specifics.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, customer complaints. Look, we all know there's lots of evidence out there that an issue that's well handled by an organization creates as much, if not more, loyalty than people who have never had an issue in the first place. It's like you think about it in home situation. Your best friends are those you know will support you in times of adversity. I mean, that's how it goes. And I would add to that, kind of in my experience, that the most common complaints you see are not about the situation itself, but about how it was handled. If I look back to my days at both Eurostar and at British Airways, the majority of complaints were not about the fact that there was bad weather and we can't fly, or there'd been an accident, the power lines were down. Instead, the complaint was about how we handled that situation. So for me, when we think about this topic, the focus about handling common customer complaints is initially, at least, you should not focus on what those complaints are, but focus on the how you're going to manage that complaint, how we manage the customer in those situations. Later on, you can look at the root causes and how to solve it and whatever and stop it recurring. So what advice would I give to people? I think at an overall level, it goes back to some of the stuff I said previously about customer experience. You mentioned my customer-led transformation model, Melanie, and the work that I do with organizations in creating customer experience starts with customer insight. You understand the customer well enough, it creates a platform for designing your customer experience that's based on what success looks like for the customer. And then you work backwards into what you do. Exactly the same should apply to handling complaints. Start with the customer and understanding their world and the situation they are in. So if you're really going to put yourself in the customer's world, I think there's a number of kind of do's and don'ts. There's kind of four things I was going to pick up on. The first one is a kind of obvious one that quite often gets forgotten, which is about communicate. Customers want information. They're not in control of this situation. You are. So you need to keep them constantly aware of what's going on. Now, I'm sure many of the people listening to this have been in a situation where they've been on a flight or on a train, and maybe there's a delay and nobody tells them what's going on. And what we learn from that is, yeah, we've got to absolutely constantly bring people up to speed on what's happening. And, one of the key things I talk about in customer insight, understanding customers, is that you need to put yourself not in your customer's shoes, but actually also inside their head. The customer's mental journey is the one we really need to understand. And when there's a problem, just think about that. What is going on in their head? There's anxiety. There's worry about when will this get solved? Will they listen to me? Will I be late for my meeting or flight connection because of this? Or in the case of financial services, will I get my money back or whatever it's going to be? And unless you're updating them on a regular basis, those anxieties continue to trouble them. So number one is communicate. Number two, and a second common problem, is what's perceived by the customer as a lack of empathy. You know, I trust you when I believe that you have, first of all, listened to me. And secondly, when I believe that you have my best interests at heart. And we need to do this in every situation. Listen, demonstrate we've listened, recognize and sympathize with their point of view. Anybody who's ever been on an objection handling training course will remember one of the first things you do in a sales situation when you meet an objection is credit the objection. They had a right to think that way. I understand why you may have that opinion. Let me try and change your mind. And the other thing is, remember to apologize as part of that as well. We have done something to them. Whether it was our fault or not, they have still been in a bad situation after buying something or dealing with us. By the way, I'm a big believer on this particular one that achieving this empathy is down to who we recruit, not down to a set of training courses. Recruitment for empathy, I think, is absolutely critical. And the people bit is important. I mean, I guess if I put my master thief hat now on and look at other situations, I did some work a while ago with actually with the fire service, looking at how they handle situations. And the two most important areas at the beginning of a bad situation that they go into is, number one, look after the people. Number two, stop the fire spreading. After that, you can think about how you're going to put the fire out. I think those same rules apply to us. So that's the second one. So the first one's communicate, the second one's empathy. The third word I wanted to pick up was a horrible jargony word that's used in business a lot, empowerment. But let me explain what I mean by that before you all kind of turn off your computers when you hear the word. For me, it's about the ability to take responsibility for the customer situation. As a customer, what I want is a single point of contact who'll take responsibility for my issue personally. Now, not only does that give confidence to the customer,
Last thing you want is to be passed around. Absolutely.
absolutely. And if you are passed around, also you can maybe get inconsistency. So it's not only that it gives you confidence, it also ensures consistency across the channel because there's one point of communication all the time with the particular customer. Now, the one single point of contact presumably has to talk to lots of departments, but as a customer, I don't want to have to do that. And I'm sure we've all got examples, as you rightly say, Adam, where we've been pushed from one department to another to try and resolve our issue. And I don't want that.
Explaining yourself over and over again. And then
Absolutely.
you start getting annoyed yourself.
That's right. Let me tell you for the 14th time what my problem is. And so we do need one person who can take responsibility and keep me informed. But what I would say is don't underestimate what it takes to achieve this. It's not an easy thing of just saying, right, you're the point of contact. You actually need to give your people the right tools and the right communication mechanisms to be able to take on this single point of contact role. And it also requires the non-customer facing departments who are part of this engine room in the background to understand their role in achieving that customer satisfaction. So it's not an easy fix, that one, but it is an important one. And then the fourth one after communication, empathy, empowerment is what I call expectation. And we need to pay a lot more attention than we perhaps do at the moment to how you manage expectations. Customers don't judge you on what you do. They judge you on what you do relative to what they expected. So we need to manage that situation. I mean, you've heard my stories before about how Starbucks get my name wrong on cups all the time. And, they set an expectation of personalization and then get it wrong. But I won't bore you with that one today. But look, the easiest thing in the world for anybody to do in this situation, I've got total sympathy with this. The easiest thing is to overpromise because it gets rid of the problem on the spot at the time it's happening. However, as we all know, all you've done is simply postpone the issue or for later, maybe you've passed it on to somebody else in another department. And of course, the obvious way of dealing with that is don't overpromise. But perhaps more importantly, it's about keeping your promises. Only make promises you can keep. Even if that promise is just, I'll call you back with an update tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning. Make sure you do call them back at 10 o'clock in the morning. And even if you've got no more information, you haven't resolved the problem, but you have kept their trust by keeping them informed and living up to what you said you were going to do.
Or perhaps started to rebuild that trust.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think in summary, as I say, before we get into the more specifics, I'd say that those are the kind of four key areas for me: communication and the importance of communication, the showing and demonstrating, not just being empathetic, but demonstrating the empathy. And that quite often comes down to recruitment, not just training people. Creating that single point of contact and empowering it to be able to resolve the thing with the customer. But that does involve bringing in the rest of the business, and then only making promises you can keep. So those are kind of four kickoffs, if you like, at a general level, before I know you guys are going to talk about some of the typical problems that we actually see.
That's great, Hamish. Thank you so much. And that's honestly, that's the best advice that anyone could receive, whatever organization you're in terms of handling complaints. So thank you. Adam, you've got some thoughts and specifics around what you've seen as key complaints within the financial services.
I do. And actually, Hamish, I think it fits quite neatly, although you'd be the judge of this, with a number of things that you've just been speaking about.
Well, if it doesn't fit, I'll just complain to you. Okay. And I'll see how you
Yes.
handle it.
You'll let me know, I know. So, what did I mean by that? So, would like to talk about some specifics. I've come up with the three most common CX complaints. And when I think about those, I don't really take much time, don't really need to take much time to explain those complaints. But picking up on your point about the mental journey that the client is going through and sympathizing with that, being empathetic, what I would like to do is for each of my three most common CX complaints that Adam Grainger has encountered in his too long career in financial services, what can we expect from the client? In Accomplish, we specialize in behavioral science, behavioral analytics. What can we expect the client to do? How can we expect them to behave in these three circumstances? So let's have a look at that. The first one is complicated onboarding. So that's the first of my three most common CX complaints. So, you're trying to join a company, as become a client of a company. How do they respond when you're just asking them to jump through lots of hoops that they either feel unnecessary or that they just don't understand? So in a B2C perspective, quite simply, they're just going to bounce in marketing terms. In behavioral terms, you will fail to convert them. In sales terms, they will leak from your sales funnel. And it's often not even a conscious decision, I don't think, because this happens to all of us, right? We're all B2C customers. I think many of us tell ourselves in these situations, oh, we'll come back to that later when we have more time. But we almost never do. I used to know someone that would say, you've got to be careful to make sure that people don't put something in the too hard box, because things that go into the too hard box, they never come out. Financial services suppliers perspective, you've lost your moment. The solution? Onboarding is your first impression. Make it digital, fast, easy, and it includes repeatable steps, right? Compliance checks, document collection, risk profiling, all of which are perfect for automation. So do that. And when you do, obvious trick, but show them their progress along the way. If it's a 7-step process, tell them they're on step number 5. That will encourage them to the finish line, because just because they've started the onboarding process does not mean they will get to the end. That's number 1 of 3. My next one that I've seen featured a lot of times in feedback surveys as well is what, in my words, I would call pushy communications. Obviously in style, and there are now an increasing number of regulations about what you should and shouldn't do in terms of style communications, but not uncommonly in terms of frequency. Where now, some firms will actually make them what to the client feels like a sort of a denial of service attack on them in terms of the amount of communications that they send out. Now, how's the client going to feel about that? Well, this is financial services. So I'm going to look at it 2 different ways, not B2C or B2B this time, but I'm going to say, well, if you hold their money and you're pushing out a lot of communications and it's too much for them, then, they're not going to unsubscribe, but they will mentally check out, because nobody can keep up with too much, because it's too much, right? they might want to block you, and that's really not an emotion that you want to engender in your clients. But they'll feel a little trapped because you now hold their money. And that's going to erode their trust. They're going to go, hang on, back to Hamish's point about expectations. I didn't expect all this hard sell after you already sold to me. So you need to understand that in that situation, quite simply, Hamish, you're a referee. You'll be on a yellow card and you might not even know about it. So that's if you do hold their money. If you don't hold their money and you overdo the communications, you are going straight to that red card. It is coming out. You're going to the junk folder or the social media equivalent. And there's almost no recovery from that. The solutions: one, never be pushy, obvious point, but when you are up against a sales target, you perhaps need to be reminded. So some good revision there. Number two, tailor the cadence of your communications by segment. Daily Digest applies well for some firms like financial advisors who may be selling your product onwards. They want the latest, hottest news in the market. But for other client segments, a monthly update is enough. Three, ask yourself, is this message really for your clients, or is it just servicing your marketing and sales goals? Because they will notice and they will form their own impression.
It's really quite interesting that, again, given what I was talking about communication, because in a sense, what we're saying is when there's a problem, we tend not to communicate enough. And when we're in a sales situation, we always communicate too much.
Well, look at whose interests. I mean, well, there's a number of things going on. I mean, obviously, when we're trying to meet a sales target, you have to communicate. And when there's an issue, I'm thinking your time at British Airways, a plane is delayed or not going, whatever. Oftentimes, I should imagine the staff are trying to work out what's happening themselves. That might slow them down from communications. But to your point, that's not the right answer. They at least need to get on the blower and tell everyone there is an issue, they're aware of it. And,
It takes 10 seconds to get on the blower and say, I'm in contact with operations at the moment. I'll give you an update in 10 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then lastly, because financial services does not involve moving humans in tubes of aluminium through the sky, much of it is digital, right? So track your results. Are your clients still engaging with your communications? Are they engaging more or less? Learn from that and iterate, because our listeners will be responsible for running different campaigns. They won't do the same thing over and over again for 3 years. They'll do something for a couple of months and do something new as they run through different campaigns.
That's really interesting because, as you say, in British Airways or Eurostar or a retail environment, you see your customers. You get the chance to observe them. You're right. In 90% of cases with financial services, you don't. But I mean, that's what your organization does, isn't it? You track behavior.
Yes, that's what we do. So complicated onboarding, pushy communications, either in style or in volume and frequency. And the third one is slow and inefficient response to their queries. And having looked at dozens of client feedback surveys, client satisfaction surveys over the years, this one is almost always at the top. So to Hamish's point, learning the general stuff, this stuff really applies because it's not about the nature of the query. It's about how you respond to the query. Melanie, jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's the easiest one to solve out of the three because that's 100%. Well, they're all in your hands, but that's the easiest one to solve, right?
If you hire for empathy,
Yeah.
like Hamish says, if you hire for sales, then you may need some revision. And the truth
Yeah.
is, most firms would probably do a little bit of both, and that might even make some sense.
I mean, it's particularly prevalent, actually, less so in financial services, particularly in technical industries, which financial services is becoming more and more. I work with a lot of tech firms where, as you say, they're employing people because they've got the technical expertise, not because they actually know how to empathize and listen to a customer.
Yes. And if they find themselves taking a query, then this is my advice. How will the client respond to slow or inefficient response to that query? So this time I want to have a look at B2C versus B2B. B2C, 30% will badmouth you. They will share what they consider to be a bad experience, whether or not you consider it to be a bad experience. And they will share that, certainly with their family and friends, and increasingly online. And just press send, and that will be their catharsis and your issue. 40%, that's 30%, 40%, and this is Accenture data, 40% will leave silently. So they will switch providers in their own mind, but it won't involve them actually closing your account and you having a chance to try and convince them to come back. It'll involve them opening up a new account and just doing more business through there, letting your account just gather dust. And it may be years before you realize that has taken place. In B2B, the stakes are higher. Okay. In B2B, those clients are organizations and they have processes that they need to conduct. And if they're raising a query, then you are holding up their process. And that is an issue. Okay. Because you're holding them up from something that they want to achieve. No one on their side will want to be seen to be supporting a supplier who is dropping the ball in their eyes. The solution, you've got to treat a query, no matter how polite it is, as an issue because it is blocking something important, because that's exactly what it is doing. So define and publish your service response standards, hold yourself to them, automate your triage of queries, but make sure high value cases get fast human support. Track your query types, your volumes, and your resolution times. And Hamish, as you alluded to, use that data to fix the root cause, not just paper over the crack of the latest query. Prevent recurrence, and actually then you start to prevent them issues arising in the first place. So those are my three. And now for the good news, all three of those are predictable and solvable. And the best firms don't just fix individual problems, though. They're constantly reviewing their query data and designing them out of the experience altogether. So go looking for the friction, fix it early, and never stop improving. And to finish, if you remember any one thing from what I've said, let it be this: your silence rate is not the same as your success rate. Look at their behavior and their activity levels. Just because clients aren't complaining doesn't mean to say they're satisfied. Actions or inaction will speak louder than words.
Wow, Adam, that's very powerful. You make a good point around going searching for complaints. What I've always done in as a client experience professional across these different areas of financial services is always make sure that everyone understands what are the key themes of the complaints, whether that's people in operations or people in marketing, whether that's the sales organization and technology teams, but everybody having a view and a clear view where the areas of complaints are means that as a whole organization, you can start to really address the root causes wherever possible. So I was reflecting on when I think about capital markets, asset management, private banking, I was thinking, what are the key themes I've seen across those different industries? And how did we begin to solve them? I think in really three areas. The one area is about speed of execution. And it comes back to expectation management. If you haven't managed people's expectations, or as you say, Adam, cited them on this is step one or step two, step three, and tell them where they are on their journey, that's where the frustration often comes out. So it's that speed of execution. So whether that's a trade or whether that's being onboarded or whether that's making a payment. So I would say it's all of those areas. The second area I've seen complaints is where there's an expectation to self-serve and help yourself. So when I mean self-serve as either as a customer, so in the B2C or even in the B2B, where you're being asked to by the company you're being served by to go into a digital platform or into an app. And then you go in there and you try and do everything, but then you get kicked out and get kicked out into a non-digital journey, and then you have to call the call center or you have to go and call the relationship manager. Those sorts of areas often are very frustrating, especially as customers and clients are trying to work and they have busy days. They don't mind working in a digital way. Not everybody loves working digitally, but on the most part, people are moving in that direction. But if you're going to push them into that journey, then make sure that you can do everything in that journey that you've promised that they'll be able to do rather than being kicked out. So that's the second area.
I think on that one, Melanie, I think what I find quite interesting from some organizations is that they're very good at managing the expectation of how long it's gonna take you to do that self-service thing. So you'll almost get a grid going along the top saying, you're 20% done, you're 30%. And I find that fantastic because at least I know what I'm in for
Yes.
now. When they don't do that, you go on really not knowing how long this is gonna take you.
That's the tracking progress that I was talking about.
Yeah.
And if you're going along digitally and suddenly you have to do something manually, like print out this form and fill it in, I'm terrible. I don't think I'm alone. I mean, I procrastinate with admin, and that gets very close
Yeah.
to what I referred to earlier as the too hard bot. Yeah, I'll do it, but 2 weeks later, have I done it yet?
Digital signatures, that's the one that gets me.
Oh, yeah, tell me about it. The third area that I've observed, and
Ooh,
this is a difficult one in the sense that it's in areas of financial services where there's a high relationship touch experience rather than the digital experience.
right.
And it's where the salesperson and the relationship management is trying to push product. And the person on the receiving end of being pushed the product does that ignore that person, doesn't pick up the phone. And so, or they tolerate it. And then when something else happens, let's say something else happens in any one of the other experiences, they will then complain about that something else, but not necessarily complain about the relationship manager or the feeling of being pushed because they don't want to offend the relationship manager or the salesperson, right?
Mhm.
So they either just silently sit in it or they just go, well, actually, I'm going to complain about something else because they're just so tired of being pushed things and especially products.
And towards the end, so they're just sort of they're looking for something to
Yeah.
complain about.
So what
Yeah.
I've observed is that having in those high touch businesses, when we have got those relationship managers, the relationship manager can do a lot in that relationship to prevent a complaint
Mhm.
in the first place. They can provide that glue. They can start to ask questions and they can get that feedback before it becomes a complaint. So they can hear the concern before the need to then voice that. However, and Adam, you said this to me early on, and you reminded me of Jamie Dimon's quote: "Their complaint is a gift."
Yes.
And and I think that is so true. If you can use that gift, and when the client or the customer is complaining, I think it's a moment in time that if you turn that complaint into a positive experience,
Yeah.
one can do that. I've had teams that do exactly that art form. They take somebody who's incredibly frustrated, and you deal with that complaint so well that they end up becoming
Oh.
advocates of the organization and are forgiving and give you extra yard length in the next experiences that they might have with you.
Yes. That's part of the point around what I was saying relating to the silence rate. A complaint is the opposite of that.
Oh, totally. Absolutely. So, I think that, I've always believed as being head of client experience in many different places, I think you can't get to zero complaints, but I think you can try and aim for that and
Mm.
set yourself an ambition of zero complaints and then marry that up with your client satisfaction surveys as well, because those client satisfaction surveys are an early sign of where you might be seeing some concerns before they even become complaints.
Yes. So looking at the time, guys, and thinking of our listeners, how do we wrap this up?
I think it's all about handling our complaints better and listening to those early signals and using data to help you, is how I
Using
would summarize.
Yeah. I think using data and interpreting that data, no complaints. You've got to look at the number of complaints and queries, but low numbers isn't necessarily good news. Have a look at other behavioral signals as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. On that note, I'm going to say to all our listeners, thank you for joining us. We do hope you have found this discussion useful and that you will join us for our final episode. So we would like to hear from you. Please do share with us any comments in the comment section. And if you like this episode, share it now with a colleague or a friend, especially if you think that they will benefit from this discussion. In our next episode, our last one in the Competitive CX podcast series, we're going to be talking about where to start with client experience if it's all brand new to you. So don't miss out, and we wish you a good day. And we too hope you can go and create a competitive client experience. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for listening to this episode of Competitive CX, the podcast dedicated to insights for financial services professionals tackling client experience challenges. We hope you found valuable strategies for enhancing client engagement in your organization.
If you enjoyed the discussion, please subscribe to Competitive CX and leave a rating and a review. Your feedback helps us reach more finance professionals seeking to overcome their CX challenges.
And you can stay up to date with the latest in client experience by following us on LinkedIn for resources designed to help you innovate and improve financial services.
Join us next time as we continue exploring how to transform client experiences in finance. Until then, keep pushing boundaries and striving for excellence in the client experience.